Hi, I'd like to welcome you all to the CBP Education Team's Ask an Expert webinar, Interpreting Challenging Strong and MBTI Results. We have more than 726 people registered today, which is very exciting. My name is Karen Gonzalez, and I'm the Associate Marketing Manager here at CBP. I'll be moderating today's webinar, and we'll be introducing our featured speaker, Judy Gruder, in just one moment. But before I do, I'd like to do a quick walkthrough of the webinar format for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. Today's webinar will run for approximately 90 minutes. During the presentation, if you have questions, you're welcome to submit them to me using the questions function in the webinar controls or send me a chat message. Judy will be pausing throughout the webinar today to answer your questions, and I'll give everyone a chance to pose their questions during these breaks. Two representatives from the CBP Education Team are also in attendance, Jim Larkin and Jack Powers, and will be available to answer questions as well at the end of the webinar. Judy will be introducing them a little later on. As with all our webinars, today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out a link in approximately a week. So now that I walked you through all the logistics, I'd like to introduce our expert. I'm very excited to welcome as CBP's Ask an Expert, Judy Gruder, GS Principal and Trainer. Judy has been a Career Development Program Consultant and Trainer for more than 35 years, as well as Professional Certified Counselor and NCDA Master Career Counselor. She's a recognized authority on the uses of assessments in career counseling and is co-author of a number of publications and reports on the Strong Interest Inventory, such as the new iStart Strong Report and various Myers-Briggs tools. Judy is also the author of the GS MBTI Certification Program for Career Counselors and Educators and is co-author of the GS Strong Interest Inventory Certification Program. Please join me in welcoming Judy, and now I'd like to turn over the webinar to her. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to look at some interesting and challenging assessment results. I don't think there's anyone that wants career assessments to provide answers more than our students and clients do. And unfortunately, career assessments were never designed to provide answers. What they can do is help the practitioner and the student to decide next steps in the career exploration process. A point that I'd like to make here is that career assessments don't stand alone. They're always part of a framework. A sample framework is here that involves assessing the person, assessing career options, testing out possibilities, exploring, and deciding next steps. What career assessments are best at is helping to identify next steps, and we're going to be looking at that a lot today. The Strong and the MBTI each provide different snapshots of personality. The MBTI, when verified, gives us a picture of genetic predispositions for energizing, processing information, making decisions, and leading our daily lives. It is who we were meant to be. The Strong gives us a picture of socialized personality, what we like doing, who we have become. If career assessment, in fact, psychology were a perfect science, we would administer tests that would tell students, here, this is what to major in. This is what career field you should enter. This is who you are. Even though there are a lot of websites that suggest, take this test to find your perfect career. It will only take 15 minutes and it will only cost $100. We all know that it doesn't work that way, even when the results are clear. My own experience has been that many times when respondents are clear, the assessment results say something different. Or when assessments are clear, the respondent says something different. In either case, the answer isn't going to be on a piece of paper or a computer screen. As the career exploration framework that we looked at suggests, what we're looking for are next steps. What we're going to look at today are some situations where even next steps aren't clear. A snapshot of personality is taken, but the image is fuzzy. Some of you have submitted some interesting Strong and MBTI results to talk about, and I've woven in a few of my own and come up with these categories. They're really just a tip of the iceberg. For the Strong, we'll look at some scale inconsistencies. Usually occupational scales that don't agree with general occupational themes or with basic interest scales. And we'll look at undifferentiated low, high, and moderate scales across the board for the Strong. and some occupations that are different on the I Start Strong report and the regular profile. For the MBTI, we'll look at unclear preferences across the board. Disagreement with career lists, that has come up a lot. And we'll spend a couple of minutes on MBTI Step 1 versus Step 2 when they're not consistent. What I'd like to see happen with the discussion today is that I'll give an example or two with some ideas for how to deal with each challenge, followed by questions and discussions from you, anything you'd like to ask or throw out. I don't have the final answer. I just have some ideas for where we can go with these. And we'll stop several times. Please text or voice your questions. I'm going to start with the strong. We don't spend as much time on the strong in these webinars as we do on the MBTI, so I'm going to start with the strong, spend a little bit more time on that than on type, and then we'll look at the MBTI. Kathleen submitted some interesting profiles, and I want to thank her for kicking off the discussion. We're going to be talking about apparent strong inconsistencies, and this is a good profile to talk about. The question is about what might be seen as a lack of consistency between the general occupational themes basic interest scales and the occupational scales. First, looking at the general occupational themes, and I'm going to call them the GOTS just to save a little spit on my part. The theme code here could be any combination of E, S, A, and C. You can see that they're all moderate. They're all within 5 points of each other, so they're essentially interchangeable. And they're in the same interpretive category. Now, E and S are supported by the highest basic interest scales. I've got the 5 that are on the report right here, 1 through 5. All 5 are high interest compared to women in general. In fact, the profile shows 2 other high basic interest scales, politics and public speaking, which is enterprising, and finance and investing, which is conventional. The question seems to be the relationship of the top 10 occupations to the basic interest scales. This is at the root of interpreting strong results, and the secret is in the scale construction and in the norming. The general occupational themes and the basic interest scales, let's call them the GOTS and the BIZs, compare respondents to men and women in the general population. These are the standard scores, the actual numbers that appear. They also compare the respondents to just their gender, in this case women, and that's the interpretive comment. So on the profile that we're looking here for the GOTS, moderate is how much interest she has in E, S, A, and C compared to women, 56, 54, 52, etc., how much interest she has compared to men and women in general. Now the occupational scales, the top 10 strong occupations we're looking at here, are very different. They compare respondents to typical workers in specific occupations. Now the GOTS and the BIZs are very easy to skew. They have very high face validity. They reflect what you think you're interested in. So you look at something like teaching or teacher, and you say strongly like, indifferent, dislike, strongly dislike. And you can tell from the question what they're asking about, and you're asked to respond honestly, I like this or I don't. Now the occupational scales are impossible to skew. You get a point on a scale anytime you answer the strong the way that people in the occupation answer the strong. So if they say like to an item and you say like, you get a point. If they say dislike and you say dislike, you get a point. And you lose points whenever you respond differently from people in the occupation. So the first thing to look for is consistency of RIASEC, the RIASEC coding, between the GOTS, the BIZs, and the OSSs. You can see on what I have up here that E and S are repeated in the coding of this person's top OSSs. And the other occupational scales on the profile show a great deal of E and S as well, along with some C and a little A. Now the general occupational theme coding answers the question, who am I? This respondent probably describes herself with words such as persuasive, assertive, self-confident, caring, helpful, cooperative, and perhaps creative and organized. This represents E and S with a little A and C. The BISs, the basic interest scales, answer the question, what is it that I like doing? The respondent has indicated specific interests in counseling, human resources, social sciences, sales, management, finance, and politics and public speaking. Now, the overall coding of the occupational scales produces a similar code and answers the question, what work environment would I find the most satisfying? ESC work environments might be described as business-oriented or entrepreneurial, fast-paced, collaborative, supportive, and organized. Now that overall occupational scales code comes from a formula. It's in the user's guide, and you look at all of the occupations that are 40 or higher, assign mathematical values to the codes, and then you can compute an overall code. Or if you're not arithmetically inclined, like a lot of counselors aren't, you can just eyeball it and pretty much see how the occupations are coming up. Now, so far, so good on this profile. It's pretty consistent. But now to be more specific, the bottom line is that the basic interest scales that are the most predictive of occupational choice, the most powerful for guiding respondents, are those that are supported by related OSSs. I want to say that again. It's probably the most important thing about the Strong. The basic interest scales that are the most predictive of occupational choice, and that's what the Strong is about, predicting occupational choice. The ones that are the most powerful for guiding respondents are those that are supported by related occupational scales. The reason for that is the person is saying like to the basic interest scales, and they're similar to typical workers in the field. Let's take these one at a time. Counseling and helping. She scored high on this. There are no counseling and helping occupational scales in her top 10, but rehab counselor, school counselor, and social worker are all significantly similar on the profile. They're all 40 or higher. Human resources and training. HR manager shows up in her top 10. Corporate trainer has a score of 49. Very similar, although it's not in her top 10. Social sciences is not represented in any of her occupational scales. Most workers who are interested in psychology, sociology, etc. do not have enterprising in their theme codes as this respondent did. But we can certainly see where she could apply these interests to her other basic interest scales. Sales. Life insurance agent, realtor, and buyer are in her top 10. Retail sales manager and sales manager are also higher than 40. Management shows up in several occupations: top executive, HR manager, financial manager, operations manager, and several others that are not in her top 10 but are 40 or higher. A high interest in finance and investing is supported by accountant and bookkeeper in her top 10. Politics and public speaking is supported by a high score on the elected public official scale. I don't have the respondent to talk to personally, but what I'm wondering is if the real interpretation issue is something other than scale inconsistency, because I'm seeing consistency all over the place. Perhaps it's a respondent who's looking for a very concrete answer, one specific job title that isn't listed on the Strong maybe, and I'm wondering what you think, and we're going to open this up for discussion after the next slide. I think this happens a lot, that students and clients take the Strong. We can see the pattern, we can see where it's going, but the student's looking for a job title. And if this person, for instance, is looking for the job title career counselor, it's not here. Rehab counselor is, school counselor is, social worker is, career counselor isn't even on the Strong. So the specific job title isn't going to show up. What I do see, though, is that when I see counseling and helping backed up with HR, when those two go together, that's a career counseling profile. So if this person isn't considering career counseling, I'd like to talk to her about it. Now here's a profile that's a little bit less consistent. I'll let you look at the information for a minute. This is a man in his 40s. He's an Air Force veteran who had worked in aerospace engineering for over 20 years. He was recently laid off. You can see his similarity to workers in related occupations. Those are the occupational scales, the OSSAs. He has very recently been introduced to the MBTI, and he's absolutely fascinated by psychology. This ISR person, absolutely fascinated by psychology. Most likely type development is going on. His type reported as INTJ, but his emerging tertiary feeling was very evident in our discussions. His interest in psychology is represented in his high social sciences biz, but isn't represented anywhere in similarity to workers. The workers that he has developed similarity to are the kinds of people that he's worked with, and they're not likely into psychology. This gentleman actually is exploring possibilities in industrial psychology and college teaching. And we're going to look a little bit more at some occupational scales, but I'd like to pause here. And Karen, I wonder if I've generated any questions yet?
We have a few, about 3 that just came in.
Okay.
The first one is from Denise. She's asking, how do you handle a student who has little interest in any theme and ended up with no theme code? Her interest areas were all little in each theme. She is 18.
So Karen, I'm just going to interrupt because Denise, we've got a couple of profiles we're going to look at that are just like that.
Great.
If Denise can just hold on for a couple of minutes, we'll get to it.
Awesome. Okay, so the next one is from Margaret. She's asking, where in the manual can I find the formula to calculate an OS code?
It's not in the manual, but it's in the user's guide.
Okay. And James is asking, can you clarify the inconsistency in the second example?
Yeah, the one that I still have it on the screen. What we have here is a general occupational theme code of investigative, social, realistic. And you'll notice that and social sciences is coming up, teaching and education, they both represent social. And then science and mathematics represent investigative, and military represents realistic. But when we look at the occupations code, the OSSAs, the S practically disappears. It came up as a very distant third when I computed the overall code. And so although his interests are IS, his occupations are IR. And we're going to mention this a little bit later, but it's when people work in an occupational environment, they literally absorb the similarity with workers. It's really interesting. I've worked with a lot of teachers over the years, and their basic interest scale of teaching will come up very little, and they'll say, I hate teaching, I've got to get out of teaching, I'm not a teacher anymore, it's just awful. And yet it'll come up as their highest occupation on the strong because they've been working with teachers for so long, they've absorbed the teaching personality. And that's one of the things that we deal with, that a similarity with workers is important, but most important when it backs up a biz. So I think the major inconsistency here is that huge switch between social and realistic. Those are opposite, by the way, opposite codes, opposite themes, and they've just completely switched between the 2 sections of the profile.
Okay, the next one is an observation from Suzanne. She says, to address the point about students needing specific names, career counselor as opposed to the strong OSs, seems like these clients have an S in their MBTI profile and rely on us to provide concrete examples. So she mentions it's an observation of her students on their campus.
Yeah, and I think she's very right, very right. And both the MBTI career report and the strong just do just that. They just give us sample occupations. And what's important to understand about the strong, which currently has 122 occupations but is going to expand fairly soon to 130, what the strong researchers try to do is pick occupations that represent huge sections of the job market. They also pick occupations that aren't going to change in the next 30 seconds because norming occupational samples is extensive and expensive. And so every 5 to 10 years we have new norming of occupations, but they're fairly generic. And the point is that we can take each one of those occupations into ONET and expand it as far as we want. But I couldn't agree more. Students want a job title. The other thing that happens is they'll come in with a job title in mind. You know, I want to be small animal veterinarian or something, and that, oh, that's not a good one because that one is on the strong, but they'll come in with something in their mind and it doesn't come up on the strong, and so their response is, well, this test isn't any good. What I want to be isn't even on it, and that's the next step for us, because if they come in saying this is what I want to do and there's no indication on the strong that it's a good fit, it's up to us to talk to them about that. We don't say don't do it. We just say you don't have the profile that typically goes into this occupation, so let's talk about how it's going to work for you.
Okay, and I have another one from Cynthia. She asks, what happens when you have the same profile but for a college-age student with little work experience?
The same, I'm not sure what she means by same profile.
Cynthia, can you specify, please? Thank you. And okay, so I have another one from Ruth. As an Army officer for over 15 years, I found that when I took the strong answering based on how I've handled situations and the duties I've performed as directed by the military, we don't get to choose our job duties very often. I found that the results of the test directed me to the things I've done in the past rather than the real me as a person, not an Army officer.
And tell me the name again of the person who submitted the question.
Ruth.
Ruth, this is one of my favorite topics. Karen, we can do a whole webinar on this.
Oh, that'd be great.
And I'm going to give you the 60-second version. When someone goes into, Ruth is absolutely right. When you go into the military, you don't necessarily get to choose what you're going to do. And if you go into the military when you're young, while your identity is forming, that would be 18, right out of high school, or right out of college. Your identity hasn't formed outside of the military, so you become what you do. This can happen in any occupation. We just see it more in people who are transitioning out of the military, it seems, than anyone else. Now, what happens, what we also see with this same group, is that when we give them the MBTI, their preferences are not clear, because they're still working through what they have been exposed to in the military, what they've been socialized to, what they've become. They're working that through, working that against who they are genetically, what was genetically programmed, who they were meant to be. And so I think that's one of the reasons why with military, with veterans in transition, we can't just give them tests, give them assessments and say, okay, here's some possibilities for you, because what's going to show up is what they know about. We have to look at the strong with something else, and the MBTI is vital here, and actually talk about whether they want to continue in the field that they've gained experience in, or whether they want to turn around and go back to what they were meant to be in the first place. And I hope I didn't confuse it too much, but we have so many client bases now that fall into this category. It's going to be a very important discussion point.
Great. Okay, so I got a little more clarification from Cynthia, so let me start over. So,
okay.
The first question was, what happens when you have the same profile but for a college-age student with little work experience, same OS scale, but it can't be because of influence of working in a field for a long time? Example, one of, I think it's many COT/BIS codes don't show up in OS code. So she's asking, which do you use?
Yeah, no, I get it. We have to go back to how these scales are constructed, because remember, the GOTS and the BISs can be skewed. So a person is going to respond to those with how they see their interests. So now we can pair them with workers, and even if they haven't worked in the field for a long time, they're going to show up with similarity to certain groups of workers or lack of similarity with certain groups of workers. And if the occupational scales don't back up the basic interest scales, we have to resolve that, because I think I said before, I would start with, you've indicated that you have an interest in X, Y, and Z, but the occupations, the people that we're comparing you with, suggest that you're not typical of people who are interested in X, Y, and Z. So you're going to be unique in that field. And I'm going to go with the stated interests. I'm going to go with the GOTS and the BISs if it's a very young person, because they're still figuring out who they are. I just want to point out to them that they might be different. and see where the discussion goes from that. The occupational scales code, though, does not take precedence over the GOTS and BIZs for a high school or college student. The BIZs are what we use for exploring majors and career fields and everything with someone that age. It's a great question and a challenging question. And since we're on occupational scales, Karen, we'd probably better go on to the next topic because we're going to generate some more questions.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Judy.
Is that okay? So we're talking about scale inconsistencies, and I just want to point out some possible discrepancies between the occupational coding on the Standard Strong profile and the occupational coding on the iStart Strong profile. I've got a clip here, and the clips I'm going to show you are from Sandy's Strong results. She was the respondent that we looked at in last month's webinar. Notice that on the standard profile shown here, Human Resources Manager is coded EAS. This is the typical theme code of the workers in the HR Manager occupational sample used by the Strong. Now on the iStart Strong report, specific occupational titles are triggered not by similarity with workers, but by the basic interest scales themselves. And actually, this kind of goes back to what Cynthia was asking. If we were using this report, then that whole occupational scale thing would fall by the wayside because we would be using just the BIZs. Now notice that Sandy scored high on human resources and training. By scoring high on human resources and training on the iStart Strong profile, it brings up related occupations along with areas of study, career fields, activities, etc. When she clicks on Human Resources Manager for more information, it takes her directly to ONET. There she finds an expanded description of the job along with a lot of specific information, everything from national and state projections to videos of people actually doing the job. Included is the ONET coding of the occupation, which I have shown here. And notice that on the Strong report, the personality of the worker is EAS. The tasks that are done on the job, which is what ONET codes, are ESC. The Strong standard profile, the expanded results, codes the typical personalities of workers who do the job. In other words, it codes the work environment. ONET codes the tasks that are typically performed on the job. The Strong goes on the premise of Holland's theory of personalities and work environments. We search for work environments that our personalities will find satisfying. In other words, we're looking for our people. If you've ever worked in a work environment that is not consistent with your personality, you know what I mean. An example that I saw recently was an artistic social, AS, social worker who was working for a state agency that was populated by SC employees. As she put it, I liked the tasks, but not how the environment required us to do them. She didn't change careers, she changed employers. And just for your information, there's approximately a 75% overlap between the coding on the Strong and the coding on ONET. And the ONET coding also follows Holland's Occupations Finder as well. Now, thank you to another webinar participant for submitting this challenge. This is really interesting for me, and I hope you find it interesting too. It provides the opportunity to discuss a couple of important issues. This client took the Strong 3 times while she was in college, and I'm going to try and show you all 3 GOT-BIZ combinations on one slide. This is the first one. This is a few months later. She had had her original Strong interpreted, and the social seems to be increasing in clarity. This one is a year later. Note that social and investigative have switched positions. But compared to both men and women, social is actually higher than investigative. The social theme is consistent throughout. Healthcare services is consistent throughout. Medical science is now appearing. The occupational scales are also fairly consistent. The medical theme keeps appearing. If you don't think the test-retest of the reliability of the Strong is good, I mean, here are 3 that were taken over almost a 2-year period, and the consistency is extraordinary. I'm going to bring you back to this slide again just to make a few points. Strong results don't have to be high to give us some good information. The most important consideration is always differentiation. As long as 1, 2, or 3 themes emerge from the others, we have a starting point. Note that as this client progresses through college, her scales increase. But I have a hunch here that this student came to college pretty much vocationally foreclosed, although the fact that she sought career counseling suggests that she might still be open. Vocational foreclosure is when the mind is made up without exploring alternatives. Usually the mind is made up by the parents or a culture or a gender or even a geographic location. And I can kind of hear some pretty strong parental messages here around medicine that were just beginning to emerge under healthcare and didn't show up with the medical science piece until a couple of years later. I suspect that some of you are already asking the question, but what did the administrative indexes look like on these profiles? I hope you're asking that, because it's the administrative indexes that we have to look at. If they're off, then we can only use strong results very sparingly, and I'm going to take a look at them with you. This is the first strong that was taken by the respondent. These are the administrative indexes. First, we check to see that she didn't omit any more than 15 questions. We're okay there. And that the typicality index is at least 17, we're okay there. We can tell from these indexes that she responded to the questions on the strong very consistently. We're probably getting an accurate snapshot of who she is at this point in time. Excuse me, when my finger slips, I go backwards. I'm sorry. Now, typical college students usually respond in the like direction about 35% of the time. In the middle, about 25%, and in the dislike direction, about 40%. Now you can see that this person is pretty heavily weighted in the dislike direction, which is why her GOTS are so little. There's some more specific percentages that we use for actually establishing interpretability, and this profile is right on the edge of not being interpretable at all. Let's see if her percentages shift as she gets older. Here's the next strong, just 4 months later, and it's even more heavily weighted in the dislike direction. She strongly dislikes two-thirds of the items on the strong, which in fact puts it way outside of the interpretable range. The upper boundary here is 56. And this suggests that something's going on behind the scenes, and the strong probably isn't going to be very helpful. We have to watch this very carefully. The slight differentiation that we saw in her GOTS was a starting point for discussion, but there is nothing about this profile that we can use to predict eventual occupational choice. Okay, here's number 3. A year later. She isn't quite as quick to dismiss everything, but her likes are still pretty narrow. I don't want to confuse you with all these numbers, but this is something that we as practitioners have to look out for. It just takes a glance before we interpret. The person who submitted these profiles for discussion said that they were pretty hard to interpret, and these are the numbers that tell us why. The strong is a restricted assessment. It does a lot more than suggest some career fields and job titles. It takes a snapshot of the person who is taking it and picks up on their mindset at the time that they're taking it. That mindset is just as important as any career fields that might be suggested. There's several reasons why someone might have results like these with high dislike percentages. We certainly want to rule out depression. I'm more likely to suspect little experience with the world of work, especially with the first one that she took. Or foreclosure, a young student coming to college with her parents' expectations weighing pretty heavily and just beginning to explore her own interests. It's our job to encourage and support her exploration, using the strong as a starting point. There's some pretty good indications here that she would want to explore various options in medicine and healthcare. What I'm hoping is that she isn't starting to explore the week before she graduates. I've made a habit over the years of collecting interesting strong profiles. I'll let you absorb this one for a minute, and I'm going to show you a few. We won't go through them piece by piece, as the interpretation strategies are pretty much dictated by the shape of the GOTS. What I want you to see is how sensitive the strong is to the mindset of the client. I obtained this profile from a graduate student that I had been supervising. She sent it to me with the email comment, "The strong doesn't work. Everything's pretty much the same." I do agree that everything is pretty much the same, but the strong is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's giving us a picture of the respondent. She responded way out of bounds in the like direction. My student was probably right that the strong wasn't very useful for career counseling, but it was very helpful in shedding light on what was going on with her. She was newly and happily divorced and didn't want to rule out any possibility. The counselor put the strong aside and worked with her actually on verifying the heart of her type. I have two depressed profiles to show you. They're very different. And you'll notice that there's no theme code on this one. The response percentages for both of the ones that we're looking at are outside of the interpretable range. This is the flag that the results are not going to be very helpful. This is a high school senior. The profile is depressed. That does not mean that she is. She just answers dislike a lot more often than she answers like. Most likely she doesn't have much experience with work or with life in general. One strategy you can use with this is to just begin the exploration process. Find the very highest occupational scale on her strong, the highest OS, and go to ONET with it. Or start with the code of that occupation and start talking about that. Here's another depressed profile. Again, no theme code. This is a college freshman, and do you see the difference? And again, we can't really use the profile to guide direction in this case either. The dislikes are way off. 77% strongly disliked. The information from the strong isn't going to predict anything. But the likes are a little bit more focused. The social's beginning to emerge from the rest. In fact, S, E, and A are beginning to emerge from R, C, and I. And the fact that S, E, and A are connected on the hexagon also there's some information coming here. At least we have a starting point for career discussion. That's about all we have. And actually, with this one, I want to show you her PISs, her personal style scales. We call them PISs. With this one, the work style personal style scale was helpful in beginning to verify the primary social theme. You see how far to the right work style is? And notice that the definition of work style scores 54 and higher, or excuse me, higher than 54, prefers working with people, enjoys helping others. So there's that altruistic piece that's a part of social that comes in. We have a mantra in the strong community, and we always joke about it during certification programs. You can be gotless and bizless. You can even be OS-less, but it's pretty hard to be PIS-less. And when there's differentiated information in the personal style scales, by all means, use it. This kind of profile is the hardest to pull anything out of, at least the hardest for me. Note that the top two are opposite, realistic and social. If this were a male, by the way, R and S would be in reverse, or would be listed in reverse order. This is the I don't know, you tell me person. It's almost always accompanied by slight PCIs on the MBTI, and it's usually generated by a lot of indifferent responses on the strong. The best approach is to see if there's any pattern to the occupational scales that might generate a theme. In this case, there weren't. The best way in, I think, is through values clarification. So I'm going to put the strong profile aside here and work on values instead, and I'm going to force prioritizing of values. And that's the key, this forced prioritization. This is a new profile shape that has begun to appear in the last few years. I call it the I want it and I want it now profile. She's a college student. She identifies with all of the enterprising characteristics. She's business-oriented, fast-paced, has the energy of a newly charged battery. She can work an iPhone faster than I can blink, and she makes decisions at about the same speed. and that enterprising is just whoosh off the chart. What she wants to know as she chooses a major is how much does it pay, where can I be my own boss the fastest. She'll most likely major in business management and hopefully be able to define what it is for her over the next few years. It's enterprising without something behind it. It's not enough. It's not enough to actually choose a career field. It's enough to choose majors, but not the career field coming out of the business major. And some of you, I know that there's some people that are attending the webinar, Karen, who are also in the Strong certification program that we do online, and in the MBTI program as well. And I sent out some YouTube videos about the millennial generation that really just connect with this kind of a profile exactly. We're dealing with a different generation of students, different values, different behaviors, and the Strong is picking that up. We're going to pause after this slide again for discussion. I'm showing you this one just as a reminder that the theme codes are positioned according to gender, and the standard scores are against the combined male and female general sample. Females don't tend to score as high on the realistic theme as males do. So it takes a lower standard score, in this case 57, to be considered high or very high on this theme than it does for artistic. We'll stop here for discussion, and then we'll look at some challenging MBTI results. And I'm spending more time on the Strong today because we've done so many webinars on verifying unclear MBTI results. But I've got a few interesting MBTI profiles too. Sharon, Karen, are you collecting questions?
Yes, we have quite a few.
Poor Karen.
That's okay. No, it's great. Okay, are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So the first one is from James. This came in right after the last pause. He asked, where did you get the typical response ranges?
The user's guide and the manual both.
Great.
I love it when there's an easy question.
Beverly came in right after. She said, please restate what you said about the total percentage and expected levels for validity.
And this is related to, was it James or James was the last question, related to the last question. If someone is atypical of people in general, if they respond way too frequently to strongly dislike or way too frequently to strongly like, the profile loses its interpretable validity, meaning that we have to explore what's behind the responses. Is that, Karen, looking at repeat the question? Karen?
Okay, I don't have it on my screen anymore, Judy.
Okay, I'm hoping I picked it up.
It sounds like you did, though, yeah. But
yeah,
if not, you can send it.
I can repeat the percentages if that's helpful. That typically college students respond in the like direction 35% of the time, and in the dislike direction about 40% of the time. But there's some boundaries of each category of response that you really have to step back and think about whether we can go ahead and interpret. And for instance, if somebody responds strongly like more than 27% of the time, you've got someone who's overloaded on strongly likes. And on strongly dislike, if they respond strongly dislike more than 56% of the time, it's going to weight the strong results in such a way that it loses its predictability. And it's not that we use the Strong to predict occupational choice, but that's the validity behind our use of it.
Okay. The next one is from Susan. If a student has a Strong that is uninterpretable, how do you recommend discussing that?
My NT just came up with a cynical response. Start with a hug. No, not really. I have a kind of a script that I use that says, first of all, I want to find out what kind of an experience taking the Strong was. What was going on for them that day? Was it a typical day? Did they understand the questions? Were there any language or reading level questions? I'm going to sort through all of that. And before you administer the Strong, you'll have some sense of whether there's any emotion, if there are any emotional or mental health issues going on behind it. You want to check out depression and rule that out, because even depressed profiles sometimes reflect depressed people, although that's not typically the case. But I'll usually say something like, when you answer the questions on the strong, you didn't say like very often. Talk to me about that. And because you didn't say like very often, we don't have a lot of useful information, but we have a couple of starting places, so let's explore those. If there's any place on the strong, if the PISs show up with some differentiation, I'm going to go right there, right to that. And actually, Jeff Prince talks about interpreting the strong starting with the personal style scales for college students, and in his publications about the strong. And it's an excellent strategy. You want to start with what's there. If there's nothing there, I think I'm going to talk about taking the MBTI and say something along the lines of, maybe you haven't had enough experience yet with work and school and life in general to really form any patterns that are going to be helpful to our discussion. So let's try another assessment.
All right. Next one is from Laura. She asks, what is the difference in the work style and the team orientation? I get that question a lot from students since they get confused about working alone and then having a high score for the team orientation.
That's in some workshops we've really dealt with this, and the other piece that we throw in is EI on the MBTI. So if usually team orientation and work style are in the same direction, usually. If work style is to the left and team orientation to the right, that's a person who wants to focus their work time individually. They want to work by themselves. They may not be introverted, but they want to work by themselves. But they want to contribute to overall team orientations. They want to be part of a team. So that might be a person, for instance, who works individually on projects, but their work contributes to the bigger picture of what the team is doing. Now, in the other direction, you can have work style to the right and team orientation to the left. That's a person who really wants to work with people, wants to focus their workday on people, but doesn't want to be part of a team. They want to be accountable only for their own work, not for the work of a group, and take responsibility for their own successes and failures, not the successes and failures of the group. And you know, when we're stuck on this, Karen, what's really, or Laura, when we're stuck, we say to the student, what does this say to you? You're indicating that you really prefer to work alone, but you want to work as part of a team. Talk to me. What does that say to you? And the great thing about career counseling that I say all the time is we don't have to have the answers, we just have to have the questions.
Great. Next one is from Jackie. With the profile with such a high strongly dislike, would you give the client a copy of the report to keep or discuss in person?
Oh, discuss in person. And I don't know if I give it to them to keep or not. It really depends on what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, they own the report, they own the results, but you just have to find out what's making it so flat. And you also want to know how the parents fit into the picture.
Okay, thank you. Next one is from Mary Ellen. Regarding flat profiles, I'm wondering if any other professional who works with college students are noticing trends toward a high likelihood of a profile coming back flat. Of the 98 profiles that I have interpreted so far this semester, approximately 58% of the profiles come back flat. Most all profiles, both male and female, come back with virtually all moderate and maybe one high. Administrative indexes trend toward high percentages of indifferent, dislike, and strongly disliked responses.
I'd love to know the setting that this person is working in, but what I'm hearing is a typical liberal arts profile. When people go to college and major in the liberal arts, they're exploring ologies and osophies and meanings and ideas and all of that, and so they're interested in everything, but not at a high enough level to register above indifferent. That's part of it. The other piece is we're dealing with college freshmen. They don't know who they are. They don't know who they are. And the strong is showing us that. So it's our job to help them to figure out who they are. And when I see a high percentage, there's obviously a pattern going on with this particular campus or work environment, I'm going to think about how the MBTI can play into this, because it might be more helpful to go there. Karen, can you pick maybe just one or two more, and then I want to take a look at some MBTI profiles too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. We have one from Yolanda. Do you recommend having students take the strong who have little to no experience?
Yes. I mean, it's interesting because most, I hate to use the word most, people develop interest whether they have experience or not. People develop interest from what they see on television, what they experience with their friends, what they do after school, what they do in school. So interests come all over the place. Now, the manual for the strong says 8th grade and higher. And I can hear Jim and Jack, our account reps, cringing. I don't usually recommend it at 8th and 9th grade. I think 10th grade is when interests begin to take shape. But I can say, and this is consistent with the last question, that interests are shaping later than they used to. There's some research to indicate that the whole identity formation issue is lagging about behind about 7 years, with students who are entering college now from the students who were entering college at the turn of the century. So there's something going on that we as career counselors have to address.
Okay, thank you. And then one more?
Yep, one more.
Okay, so Barbara.
Don't make it too hard. Don't make it too hard. Barbara, okay.
Well, let's see. Okay, so Barbara's asking, she uses the dominant and auxiliary function of a client's MBTI as a gatekeeper for career discussion when a client has an undifferentiated strong. Often
I agree.
Often the client gravitates towards careers that support their dominant and auxiliary function,
yes.
Meaning careers that allow them to use their preferences in the day-to-day tasks of a job. Your thoughts on this?
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. No, absolutely. And that's, I think these instruments are magical together. And we're doing a whole webinar in February that just addresses how to use them together. And if you've got a flat strong, the MBTI, if you can get clarity on those middle two letters, the MBTI will tell us what they should like if they knew about it. And so that's certainly a starting point. And if you're not using them together automatically, you want to have the MBTI as a backup when the strong is flat. So good for Barbara. Sounds like she was in our certification program. That's an NT joke, Barbara. Okay, Karen, I'm going to go on with a couple of MBTIs here just to throw that into the mix.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Here's a hefty MBTI. And the results that we're going to look at underscore the importance of working respondents through the type verification process and not just handing them their results. One of our participants, Ginny, asked if I had ever seen a profile with PCIs of 30 on each dichotomy. She had one in her office a few years back and felt a bit odd presenting it to him. And no, I haven't seen one that's 30, 30, 30, 30. This is the closest that I had in my files, but I think it makes the same point. And I want to comment on feeling odd about presenting it. It's very important during the type verification process that we emphasize with respondents that PCIs do not represent amounts. This person, for instance, isn't any more of an ESTJ than someone with less clear preferences. In talking this client or Jenny's client through the type verification and self-estimating process, he will probably estimate his preferences very quickly and very accurately. Then when you share his reported results with him, it's perfectly natural to say something along the lines of, you seem pretty certain of your preferences when we talked about them, and your report says the same thing. When forced to choose between the preferences in each pair, you chose E, S, T, and J almost all the time. That doesn't mean that you don't also move into I, N, F, and P when it's appropriate to do so. We'll explore that together. Now, Ginny also mentioned that we're more likely to see less clear results than we are very clear results, and I agree. And that's part of why they're coming to us for help. They're clarifying who they are and what they want. Remember, the MBTI is who am I? It's who was I meant to be. This is a high school junior, and I think she might be typical of her age and stage of development. And this one actually, Ginny asked the question, but this profile came from someone else. The middle two letters of type are the identity core, the heart of our type. The outside letters provide the behavioral framework within which we live out our heart. So the middle two letters are the identity, and then E, I, and JP are behaviors. And you'll see on lists of careers for the different types that types with the same middle two letters are often drawn to similar career fields. In the case of NF, it's often the arts or empowering others. The E, I, and JP preferences tend to narrow career fields down into more specific job titles. And I'd probably talk with this student about the 4 different hearts of type and then verify that she wants to work in an active, organized environment, that EJ that's showing up, working with others within a preset structure perhaps. And it goes both ways with young people. This is the same as the last profile, only in different directions. And our approach would also be the same. Most of the MBTI publications, Introduction to Type in Careers, etc., are good references for the 4 hearts of type. If the student that we just looked at actually verifies NF, we can look at specific NF majors and career fields. Here's a list of majors. These suggestions appear in all of the MBTI literature. And those majors, of course, are related to career fields. We don't really have to talk job titles until this student gets much older. It's not likely that a high school student or even a college freshman will be able or even want to fill in the blank, I want to be a blank. But we do want them to be able to say something along the lines of, I'm most motivated by blank, or I really like blank. This is another unclear profile that might be challenging. Believe me, I've seen them all. I call this one the I want to work with people profile. The question for a profile like this then becomes, how do you want to work with people? Do you want to work with them to get things right? Do you want to help them with practical resources? Do you want to empower them through insights and creativity? Or do you want to strategize with them to solve problems? There'll always be the person who says that they can't choose, that they don't know, that they want to do them all. And this might very well be an unclear identity. It may not be a career counseling or coaching issue at all. Always keep in mind that the MBTI and the Strong are restricted psychological assessments for a reason. They provide snapshots of who the person is at one moment in time. Whatever issues a person is dealing with will be likely to show up in the results, and we have to be able to recognize them and make referrals when necessary. This is probably the most challenging kind of MBTI profile to verify. Could even go with the Strong profile we looked at that was little. It shows very clearly why verifying type with respondents is so important. This person could actually be any one of 16 types. Remember, any PCI lower than 5, lower than 6, it's slight, and it could go in the other direction. If the respondent isn't clear, if there's no clarity in the person, the MBTI is going to show that. It's not going to provide clarity if it's not there. With something like this, I'd probably start by describing what type is and reassuring, this happens to be a female, reassuring her that type is never meant to restrict us to one set of behaviors. I'd then do the handedness exercise, having her write her name with each hand to demonstrate what natural is. Make sure that she understands that even though we all have a hand that we use more naturally, there are many times when we depend on the other hand for support. We even turn to the other hand sometimes because it's more appropriate, and type preferences work the same way. I want her to understand that. It might be a good idea to talk her through what it was like for her to answer the questions. Was it a typical day for her? How does she feel? You might find out that she was instructed to answer the questions according to how she is at work, and her true type is not who she is at work at all. Or you might find out that her answers were going back and forth between who she really is and what she thinks is expected of her. I would then talk her through each of the preference pairs, starting with the functions, the middle two letters, and see what we could narrow down. I'd be sure to provide examples of S, N, T, and F in both their introverted and extroverted forms. And I would go through descriptions of the 4 hearts of type, the type table columns. We looked at them a few slides back. If she's able to choose one set of letters for the middle two, I'd go on with E, I, and JP. Usually profiles like this can be narrowed down to at least 3 or 4 types. You can then take the respondent to one of the tables that describes the essence of each type. This one comes from Introduction to Type. It's also in the manual and most of the other Introduction to Type publications. And you can then take them to the full-page descriptions that she identifies with. They're full-page descriptions in Introduction to Type that have type dynamics built in. And if you can narrow it down to 3 or 4 on this chart, then the full-page descriptions will begin to fall into place. You might find that you're working with someone who just isn't capable of verifying a type, or even 3 or 4 that might be possibilities. Keep in mind that the purpose of administering the MBTI tool is not to tell someone their type. And you certainly don't want to turn the type verification experience into a super frustrating experience, super frustrating conversation, either for the respondent or for you. The purpose of using the MBTI in career development work is to suggest a framework within which to explore both self and career possibilities. You just want to be able to identify where to start and what kinds of questions to ask. It may be that this respondent requires a referral. I was doing the initial type verification with a group a few weeks ago, and a student absolutely refused to choose. She just wouldn't. She rejected her reported type. She insisted that she use all 8 preferences equally. We all know that that isn't possible. The more I tried to work with her within the group, the more stubborn she got that she wasn't any one of 16 types. We were able to narrow it down to 8. And for homework between classes, when the other students were researching occupations, I asked her to look up each of the 8 types in Introduction to Type and choose words and phrases from each of the full-page descriptions that she most identified with. She was essentially creating her own type description. She loved this approach. She loved feeling unique, and she really liked having a different assignment from everyone else, and she did it. Not only did she come up with a description that she could live with, but in doing the exercise, she eliminated 6 of the 8 types that she was considering. What she came up with was very close to INTP or possibly ENTP. Some of you are probably thinking what I was thinking when she was in the group, that there's certain types that respond to their first introduction to type this way, and you know what they are, but you just can't say what you think out loud. You have to swallow it and never tell people their type. You can say something like, in this conversation, I'm hearing more intuition than sensing. What do the rest of you think? If that's comfortable to say in front of a group, but you can't ever tell someone their type. What was interesting about this young woman is that the next class was about type and learning styles, and she very quickly identified with EN learning style over IN. We actually did an entire webinar last year on verifying unclear results, and it's in the cpp.com webinar archives if you want to check it out. And looking at learning style, looking at the quadrants is one approach to looking at type. Since the unclear profile that we were just looking at is a reported ESFP type, I want to remind you of something very important about the popular occupations lists on the career report. The career report for the MBTI rank orders 282 specific occupational titles. These occupations come from self-selection ratios, occupations where the type is highly represented, more highly represented than is likely from their representation in the population in general. I'm going to mute for just a second to clear my throat. Thanks. I hate coughing into a microphone. Now, notice for this ESFP report that very few professional level occupations are listed in the top 24. None of these really requires a college degree. This is because ESFP types have a very low graduation rate from four-year colleges and universities, so they're not often found in professional occupations. And when you're using the career report with SP college students, you want to focus on the SF and ST hearts of type and on the threads that are apparent in the occupational titles, rather than on the titles themselves. Notice the threads here of practical helping and hands-on work that appear in the list. I can tell you that if you're also communicating with the parent of this student, and the parent's paying $80,000 a year to send this student to college, and this is the occupational list that comes up, you have to be prepared to respond to this. I'm so glad that one of you asked how this client's Step 1 results could be INFP. This is a Step 1 profile that is the first piece of the Step 2 report. The Step 2 provides 20 subscales, 20 additional facets to the 4 letters that are in a type. And the question here is that their reported type is INFP, but you're going to see in a minute that all of their Step 2 facets were on the T side. Notice that both EI and TF are slight, meaning that we're not sure at all that the assessment got his ENFP right. That's what PCIs tell us, how much confidence we can put in the accuracy of the results. So the first step is to verify the 4-letter type here. It could probably be any one of 4 types, INFP, ENFP, INTP, ENTP. He apparently verified INFP because that's what the Step 2 report was scored for. Now here's the issue. Here are the TF facets. Remember, he verified feeling, but all 5 facets point to T. But logical, empathetic, and tough tender are actually in the mid-zone. Mid-zone can go either way. This is how the report actually describes him. Note that as an INFP, he has both E and T facets. Expressive, active, enthusiastic, reasonable, questioning, critical. If he had verified INTP over INFP or any other type, the report would have been rescored for the verified 4-letter type. I know this is a lot. We're going to pause after the next slide so we can have some more discussion before we close. But what I want you to notice with this Step 1, Step 2 inconsistency is that the overall preference pair is greater than the sum of its related facets. These are the 5 facets on the Step 2 profile. And the overall preference here is greater than the sum of its parts in 2 different ways. There are items on the Step 1 dichotomies that are not included in any of the facets. In fact, there may be additional facets of each dichotomy that have not yet been identified. And the other piece is that the description of the Step 1 type is a function of type dynamics, the interaction between all 4 preferences in a person's type, and that's helpful information in identifying the overall 4-letter type. Now, Karen, that's as far as I'm going to go with my examples, and we have about 10 minutes for other questions and discussion points that come in.
Okay. Let's see. I got the first one here from Edison. Edison is asking, I had someone with a preference ESFP as described in your assessment about 2 days ago. The student did not seem or appear to be unclear, and Edison clarifies, when I mean unclear, I also mean the person did not appear to be lost or directionless. How do I direct this person?
I'm not sure what the question is. The person is ESFP and is clear and has verified the type, then you have the information you need for directing the person. You have the SF, which is helping others with practical resources and in practical ways. And then you have E and P, energized by interaction with others and working spontaneously on the spot. I would explore the career fields, not the occupational titles necessarily, but the career fields from the career report. You can take those into ONET and they will all expand into more possibilities that are at a professional level. Maybe the point is, like the one I showed, that you've got a college student whose report doesn't look professional. And it's because ESFPs usually don't graduate from college. And the career report actually gives us an opportunity to say to the student or the parent, these are the kinds of occupations that ESFPs typically wind up in, and we can jack all of those up 1 or 2 levels of professionalism by adding a college degree. Might be a motivation to stay in school.
Judy, Edison sent a little bit clarification saying, I meant the person appeared to be okay and not depressed, that their preferences were slight.
Oh, that happens. That happens definitely. That's why, though, you want to talk them through. That's why you want to do the type verification. I've also had people with very clear preferences, like that ESTJ person we looked at, that will reject the results. So it can go both ways. You have to find out why they didn't answer the questions consistently, or why they did. It's not a big deal. If you talk them through the preferences and and you're good at describing the preferences and they verify it, you go with that. And in this case, it sounds like the person agreed with the reported type. The reported type just wasn't too clear. And Karen?
Yes?
Are you there? While we're looking at some more questions, I'm going to put the certification providers up, because a lot of people will be wanting this information, and we're not going to be talking about it too much. These are the providers at the top: CPP, AMA, CAPT, and GS, that offer MBTI certification. And then the Strong certification is offered through GS, both online and live. I'm just going to leave that up there while we talk about some more questions that have come in.
Okay. Lisa had previously asked about what you meant by 40 on the Strong. This was a little bit earlier on. So she just wanted a little bit clarification of what that number was.
Right. Thanks, Lisa. On the occupational scales, not the GOTS, BISs, and PISs, but on the occupations themselves, where you're looking at similarity with workers, any score higher than 39 is considered more similarity with the workers and is likely to happen by chance. And so those are the occupations to consider. And actually what I do on a profile is I draw a line right down the occupational scales so that you can see visually every occupation that moves beyond that 40 point.
Thanks. Sarah had asked, if length of the bars does not matter, why do they show?
Well, a lot of people think they shouldn't. We're talking about the MBTI.
Right.
They indicate they do matter. They do matter. They just don't measure. There's something we can publish. They matter. They don't measure. What they reflect for the respondent is the clarity of the preferences, how certain the person was when they answered the questions, that they were in one direction over the other. What they tell the practitioner, that would be us, is how certain we can be that the assessment got it right. So 2 important points. They indicate the clarity to the respondent and the accuracy to the practitioner. So that's important information.
Okay. Paul. Paul says he's heard that the preferences develop at different rates over time, and that in middle age we often concentrate on developing our less dominant preferences. What do you advise about giving the MBTI to a young person whose preferences are not clearly developed?
Well, preferences do develop over time, and theoretically the dominant and the auxiliary, the middle 2 letters of the verified type, develop during the first half of life, and then they're joined by the tertiary and the least preferred in the second half of life. That's the integration stage of personality. And the MBTI serves a different purpose at each stage. I find both of these profiles very helpful excuse me, when results aren't clear, because we need to see that clarity, and that's what we're going to be working on with the respondent or with the client. And you know, there's something amazing about the MBTI, and I know there are a lot of data, and those of you who are sensing have looked at all that data with me in the certification programs. But I'm just amazed anecdotally. I've got over 4,500 combination strong and MBTI profiles in my files, how many times the MBTI will come up with PCIs in the slight range and they're accurate? I mean, that's a good assessment. And that's what sets the MBTI apart from the cutesy assessments that are on the internet, for instance, that we can download and play with. If a person's type is very clear, it doesn't matter what you use, but most of the people who come to us have unclear types. And if types are unclear, you want an instrument that's good at picking up whatever clarity there is. End of sermon.
Thanks, Judy. Let's see, next one is from Laura. Laura's noticed that radiologic technologist, sorry, that was a tongue twister, comes up as very similar for many students with flat profiles. Is there a reason for this?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because the coding is RS. And those are opposite codes. So if you have a flat profile, you're all over the hexagon, and that's one occupation that picks up opposites. And she's absolutely right, it does. On the old profile, it was flight attendant. You know, whenever the occupations are renormed, we have different occupations that show up more frequently than you might expect. But radiologic technician is a really robust occupational scale. It says something. It says that the person wants to help others doing something physical, working with equipment to help others, for instance. And if it's a flat profile and that shows up, that's a starting point for discussion. Let's go to the ONET and look at other occupations that might be related and listen to what the student says. Are they interested in what you're talking about? But boy, she's looking at her profiles really closely. Good job.
We have another one from Danielle. Upon your studies, are there any MBTI types that seem to mistype more frequently at first than other types?
Excuse me, miss what?
Mistype.
Wow, there's a dissertation for somebody. You know, I don't know. I have an introverted preference myself, and I'm sure that I'll think about this for the next 3 hours and come up with an answer, or come up with probably not the right answer, but an idea. I don't think so. There are a couple of patterns that I see. Feeling men who have worked in the corporate world will mistype as T. And certainly thinking women who have been brought up in social services and helping environments will mistype as F. I see that. The other thing I'm seeing, see, this is what happens. I'm thinking out loud, which I shouldn't do. But the other things we're seeing is with millennial students, extroversion is dominant. I mean, extroversion is showing up much more frequently than it used to. And even when we verify the type, they're not verifying introversion. And I don't think that we are giving birth to more extroverts. I just don't think that we're creating more extroverts. I just think that there's such an emphasis in the millennial generation to be extroverted that that's how they answer the questions. And it's going to take some development. Some of you have seen the Jonas Polak videos that I mentioned on the millennial generation. They haven't gotten into their soul yet. They're still just so excited over being alive that extroversion is popping up much more often than it should. So there are all kinds of possibilities here. I don't have a specific answer. Maybe someone else does. Maybe someone else has seen something.
Great. Actually, you just mentioned the YouTube video. We've had a few people asking how they can access those YouTube videos.
If you Google Jonas Polak, Jonas Pollack, they'll come up. They're in 3 parts, part 1, part 2, and part 3. If you're in the certification programs with me, I've posted them there as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Between Google and YouTube, we can answer any questions in the world.
Right? Yeah. Great. So the next one is Linda. She's asking, please comment on using this combination of assessments for adult career changers.
The strong and the MBTI, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we've actually done. We did a a webinar, it was either last month or the month before, on using the MBTI with adults. With adults, there's a different focus to the interpretation. You have to establish, or you have to just explore in the beginning of your counseling whether the person is looking for a really good fit because they've been in a bad fit up until this point, or whether their personality is integrating the other side and they're looking to expand, to enrich what they're doing. So those are the two different points of focus for the MBTI. For the strong, boy, I use the strong with adult career changers all the time. That's where you look at the basic interest scales versus the occupational scales. And with the occupational scales, you're going to get the kind of work environment the person wants to work in. You just pay a lot more attention with adults to the overall coding of the occupational scales than you do with real young students. But yeah, I use them. Of course, these are my instruments of choice. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this webinar if these were not my instruments of choice. And I am the first to recognize that career counselors use all different kinds of assessments. I just happen to really find that these have the information that I need. I'm going to add some values work, though. I think I use the middle two letters of type to talk about values, but I really like values clarification work. And with adults, it's just as important as with younger folks. Karen, we probably got maybe 3 or 4 more minutes.
Okay, so I think this might be the last one then. This is from Janet. She has an adult client in his 30s who became what he did. He's worked since age 14. After a 2-hour discussion with him, he has no apparent areas of interest. She's giving him the MBTI, but if he's unclear, what else can she do to help him uncover innate interests and talent?
I think she's probably going to find that when she talks, when she administers the MBTI and talks through a verified type, you're going to have a very powerful breakthrough. When people become what they have done, and they take the MBTI and discuss it, I mean, it's not just the reported results, it's verifying type, there's an awareness that happens. It's kind of an oh my gosh awareness. The positive side of that is that they have already developed the other side of their type. And they bring that skill set into whatever they were meant to be. And the second half, the next part of the career is going to be much richer. It's going to be much more exciting. But you're also going to have to focus on some value stuff. We hear and we read and we see on television all these people who are 45 who were billionaires and now they're becoming Amish furniture makers or something. Well, they can afford to because they're billionaires. But we've also got 45-year-olds who have worked in an occupation until they're 45 and they've earned $60,000 a year. Now it's gone, and they have families to support. And sometimes they don't have the luxury of just completely switching gears at 45. And so in that case, you're going to talk about life balance. Teaching them to compromise in their work setting, to perhaps generate opportunities for themselves within their work setting to use who they were meant to be, and talk about what they can do outside of work that excites them a little more. That's this economy, and it's tough. Is that a good ending point, Karen? Because I do want to introduce people. I at least want to show the faces of Jim and Jack. These are the CPP Education Account Representatives with their contact information. They're both wonderful and knowledgeable and can help you with any questions about these assessments related to education. And a reminder that if you're an international customer, you're going to want to go to cpp.com global sales, and you'll be put in touch with someone who can help you with the assessments. And we always have this information. Note that we've changed the website for actually taking them. If you want to take the MBTI and the Strong or sample one of the reports, here's the link to the CPP Evaluations website. You'll be asked to complete a short evaluation first, an evaluation of the webinar, and then you'll be directed to the testing site. GS, which is my company, also has a blog where we talk about challenging interpretation issues. And it's not up here, but there's also a really great discussion group in LinkedIn on the Strong. It's for strong interest inventory practitioners. Really good discussions go on there. I'm very excited about what I'm seeing there. If you need CEUs for this, Master Practitioner CEUs or NBCC certification, you can complete a certificate request at cpp.com/AAE certificate. And I think that's it, Karen, and I think we're right close to 12:30.
Great. All right, well, I'd like to thank everyone today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so we weren't able to get to everyone's questions, but I would like to thank you all for taking time out of your day to attend and for asking such great questions. I'd also like to thank Judy for sharing her knowledge and expertise with us today. So thank you so much, Judy. Today's webinar is part of an ongoing series featuring Judy as our expert. Our next webinar is scheduled for February 9th and will cover the topic, Combining the Strong and MBTI Results in Career Counseling. To register, please visit our website at www.cpp.com/askanexpert. We hope you'll be able to join us in February. Thank you all for attending today and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.